the food industry has totally set us up to fail. We've got to be really careful with packaging. Just because it says gluten-free, organic, or it says real fruit doesn't mean it's instantly healthy. At first I thought this could sound really restrictive, but in a funny way I found that it started to give me freedom around food, because then I found all these foods I could eat and all these alternatives.
The method in how you achieve something is so important.
A lot of autoimmune conditions, they find that the patients have leaky gut as well.
People have different definitions of processed food. So what is your definition of something being processed?
Yeah, I suppose more for me it's about...
Peta, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Your journey from battling an autoimmune disease to founding Goodness Me is so inspiring. Let's start by you just sharing a little bit about your journey and your background and how it all came about.
Yeah, sure. Well, I suppose it all started, I was 21 and I got really sick. I was like in bed for 3 months. But I kind of never recovered after that, and I just had like super low energy. My immune system was completely shot. I was waking up every day with body aches and headaches, and it just went on and on. And I started on this journey going to all these doctors and really not getting any answers. Like I got the typical, it's chronic fatigue, it's all in your head, it's glandular, it's just everything. And it just kept happening over and over to the point where I couldn't find any solutions. And it was 3 years on and I was still waking up every day feeling like this. But by that point, it had just become my normal. Like I'd forgotten what it was like, you know what I mean, to wake up and have that kind of full energy every single day. And I think also when you go through the health system like that, it's really disheartening. And you take your doctor's word as gospel as well, you know, like they tell you something and you're like, okay, I'll listen to that because that's what they've said to me, rather than questioning anything. And at the same time, like I was at that age, you know, your friends are going out, they're all having fun. I'd go to work and I'd be like sleeping on the weekend, and like I was exhausted. And then finally 3 years later, I went to an immunologist and they told me that I actually had an antibody deficiency, which was sort of essentially an autoimmune condition. So my body doesn't create antibodies like other people's. And as a result, that's why I was getting sick all the time. I couldn't recover and bounce back. Like my body was just in this permanent state of a terrible immune system. So, and I was essentially told, like, there's nothing you can do. You've just got to go to hospital every month for the rest of your life. I'd recommend you get these protein antibody transfusions. And that was it, you know. So I walked out of that appointment. A part of me was relieved to finally have a diagnosis that made sense. But then I woke up the next morning and I was so angry. I was like, I'm 24. What are you saying that there's no solution for this? Like I just thought that's ridiculous. And that's when I started looking for an integrative doctor. So someone who actually doesn't just look at the particular symptom and treat that symptom and not the cause, but who looks at the body more holistically. And I was lucky enough to find this amazing GP. And the first thing she said to me when I walked in was like, you need to reduce the inflammation in your body. You need to cut out processed food. You need to heal your gut. And that this is manageable, essentially. So that was the start of really giving me hope. And I was so desperate at that point to feel better that I just really followed everything she recommended as well. And that sort of kicked off my journey into the health food world and just cutting out processed foods and exploring that space.
It's so confronting hearing something like that where you're like, okay, I finally have an answer, but now I have something that is going on in my body and a doctor is telling me that I need to go and be hospitalized every month as a cure of, you know, this condition. That is such a confronting moment, right?
Yeah. And especially being so young, I think anyone that's experienced illness for long term, you can go through some real lows as well. And you just feel so helpless. You can get, depressed. You can just have some really low moments because you just feel like there's no solution and it's really frustrating.
Yeah.
So I think getting that hope from another doctor saying this is a potential solution, and it was about treating the cause and not just let's just pop a Band-Aid
Yeah.
over to temporarily help the solution.
Yeah.
That was a huge thing for me.
Autoimmune diseases are becoming increasingly common. And so I'd really like to tap into some of the symptoms that you felt because you did mention that it became the norm. And I
Mm,
feel like so many people that are listening to this are probably experiencing something that isn't the norm, but they've just adjusted to it. They're like, oh, yeah, this is just my energy levels. Like, I'm just tired.
yeah.
Like, it's just fatigue. I'm just working too much or I'm exercising too much or whatever it may be. And they just have an excuse for it. So, what are some of those symptoms that you experienced that led you to being like, look, something's not right?
Yeah. Well, firstly, I went and did a whole bunch of research after, and there's over 80 different kinds of autoimmune conditions, and they can manifest in so many different ways in the body. So, what I was experiencing could be totally different to someone else's autoimmune condition, but I had incredible fatigue, low energy, those achy limbs. A key sign for me was always like my glands would swell up as well. I could feel headaches. And then I also used to get what I'd call flare ups. It was just like I'd wake up in the morning with these intense headaches, almost like, I don't know, I feel like flare up's the best word to describe it. Like my whole body would just feel, yeah, in this flared state. And that was really only rest would help that. Um, but from what I've read, like a lot of autoimmune conditions, they find that the patients have leaky gut as well. So that's when your small intestines are permeable. And so you've got particles coming through into the bloodstream. And that's when your body goes, we've got an invasion, let's, attack. And that's why it can manifest in different ways. Um, and so, yeah, for me, that's just how it looked and how it felt. And that's why healing the gut was part of it. And they don't know if one causes the other, but they've noticed that it's common to
There's a
happen
connection.
together.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a connection. And so part of the reason the doctor was like, cut out processed food, reduce inflammation is because, from my point of view, you can treat your body a certain way only for so long. And at some point, and for everyone it's different, but, if we don't treat it right, it can eventually break. And that's what mine looked like at that
What
point.
was your diet like before that? So while you were experiencing all these symptoms, so prior to seeing this doctor that told you to cut out all the processed food, what was your diet and lifestyle like before that?
Yeah. So, I mean, at the time, I thought it was fairly normal. Like, I grew up not really thinking much about food. I didn't think much about body image either. Like, I was always, the skinny kid at school and could eat whatever, which might have been part of the problem eating all like processed snacks and stuff. But I think when I finished school, I became more conscious of body image as well and then trying to eat healthy. But what I thought was healthy was foods labeled as low fat or diet or light milk. So it was also like the unsuspecting stuff, but these are all the things with processed ingredients in it. And then of course alcohol was the other thing. I would immediately get sick if I'd go out drinking, and not just sick as in hangover the next day, like for the whole week to come, and I'd catch a virus. And so that really wasn't good for me either. I think it was just the processed food and the alcohol. My body just couldn't handle it. And I probably, wasn't doing it more heavily than the standard 20-year-old out there. But yeah, and I think when it came to food, I'd never felt worse. I'd never probably like looked worse eating food like that. I'd never thought about food more, like how, like, the worst thing is like thinking about what am I going to eat next and what am I going to think about after. Like, it
Yep.
shouldn't even be a thought or a
Yep.
stress or anything in an effort to try be healthy, which was completely misunderstood. And it's often the foods I find these days, like at the supermarket, that you think might be healthy for you, the way they're promoted to you, but the packaging's really quite deceiving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do want to get into just reading packaging a little bit later. But before I go back to your journey, a question that I really would love to ask is how do you define processed? Because people have different definitions of processed food.
Mm.
So what is your definition of something being processed?
Yeah. I suppose more for me, it's about, and what I get asked a lot is like, what do you consider healthy? And so for me, it was about how do I find foods that are nutrient dense at a really simple level? Like food should just make you feel good. So when I went out there on my journey, it was about, okay, if I'm going to buy something that's packaged, I'd only look at the ingredients, not necessarily the nutritional panel, and make sure that there are real food ingredients there that I understood.
Yeah.
And I think that's really key. Like, are we eating real food? And it's such a weird world at the moment where, like, the health food aisle, firstly, we've got something called the health food aisle at the supermarket that takes up 5% of the products in there. And then you've got to think, well, what is everything else
Yeah.
that I'm eating? But that's become the norm out there. And I think our food industry is just so fundamentally flawed because of that. So, eating packaged food, I was like, was this made from real ingredients? And then obviously, eating fresh produce and things like that. I think it's quite unavoidable how
Yep.
we live, at the moment, to have something that's completely hasn't gone through a machine these days. Like, we're all time poor. I don't have time for scratch cooking every night. Like, I just, you know what I mean? I'm not a good cook at all either.
Yeah.
So like I want easy as well. But it just became about figuring out, well, what are the better choices and what options do I have? And if I can make more informed choices and understand what to look for, then, I can do good for my body and feel good at
Yeah,
the end of the day.
absolutely. So let's go back to that day. You had your appointment with this doctor and she told you to address your diet. She said it could be coming from the gut and, all this inflammation, and we need to
Mm.
cut out processed foods and start following a more whole foods diet. So you walk out of this appointment. Firstly, how did you feel and what was the first step that you took? Because it's very different when someone tells you that you need to address your diet, and the way that you eat is so different to what they're proposing to eat. So like, what were those steps that you took and how did you start to embark on that journey?
Yeah. So firstly, it is very overwhelming. I was speaking to someone the other day who was having huge gut problems, and even today, finds it overwhelming with all the options out there. But this was 10 years ago, and we did not have nearly as many options out there. Restaurants out there in Sydney like didn't cater to gluten-free and whole food menus necessarily and things like that. So I started by going into a lot of health food stores. And I started looking at the products there and finding that there were so many products there that actually tasted really good. I'd turn around the packaging. It was actually items that I understood, whereas I'd walk into the supermarket and was really struggling to find anything without additives. So essentially ingredients with numbers and ingredients that I just didn't even know
Can't even
what they
pronounce.
were. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, I wasn't a nutritionist. I'm still not a nutritionist. Like, I didn't know. I was just trying to keep it simple,
Yeah.
essentially. And it was so hard to keep it simple. But then I got so excited discovering all these products made with real ingredients that actually tasted good. And I think there's a huge perception, and I certainly had it, that healthy doesn't taste good. And so I got so excited finding all these products, thinking these taste really good. Why don't more people know about them? Why aren't these products out there more, in the mainstream? So that was the first step. It was just like a discovery process. I didn't go change my whole pantry from day one. The other thing to reduce my inflammation was I was recommended to go gluten-free, and that was for my particular condition. So figuring out, well, what are the brands and what are the alternatives I can buy or make to do that switch. Um, so yeah, just starting simple and essentially also doing it like category at a time. How do I, make a wholesome breakfast? Maybe I'll switch my soft drinks that are filled with all those artificial sweeteners and swap it for something else. Maybe I'll switch all those inflammatory oils like seed oils and vegetable oils and make sure I'm having, healthy fats like avocado oil and coconut oil. And that was one thing as well before. Like, I used to avoid oils a lot because I thought they were bad and I thought maybe they were fattening, but like your body really needs them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was such a journey and a step-by-step process. It certainly wasn't instant.
And I love that, because I think anyone listening to this that may have an autoimmune disease or maybe embarking on a journey very similar to what you did 10 years ago would feel so overwhelmed with this extreme lifestyle haul. Like they're like, I now can't have any of the foods that I would eat. My diet's changing, my lifestyle's changing. Where do I start? But the fact that you said 2 points, one, you kept it simple,
Mm.
which is so important. But two, it was progressive and you did it over time. So you may change one thing or you replaced another thing. And then it might be one meal category where you might change one thing. And it wasn't like you went into your pantry, threw everything out and bought a whole new pantry. You progressively started to improve the
Yeah.
way that you ate, which I think is really great advice.
Yeah. And you know what? It was a discovery process that I actually enjoyed. Like at first I thought this could sound really restrictive, and there's nothing worse than feeling
Oh,
restricted with
yeah.
the food you're going to eat. But in a funny way, I found that it started to give me freedom around food, because then I found all these foods I could eat and all these, I say, like alternatives, because, in that time they were considered, alternate to what's traditionally on the supermarket shelf. But they were foods that tasted good, that made me feel good. There was no sort of category of food I couldn't essentially eat. Like if you want chocolate, if you want chips, if you want
Yeah.
ice cream, sure, like go for it. Just let's make sure it's made from real food,
Yeah. I do have a question because you did touch on gluten-free and then we speak about unprocessed foods. Did you find that really hard to find gluten-free alternatives that weren't processed? Because unless they're naturally gluten-free, right? So when you're eating like your veg potato salads, like, they don't contain gluten. But when you look at like gluten-free breads and you look at like gluten-free Tim Tams or like gluten-free crackers, to make it, although like the real crackers and chocolates may contain, they're processed, but to make something gluten-free that isn't gluten-free, there is a lot of processed elements. Did you find that hard?
Yeah, there can be. And so I think this is where we've got to be really careful with packaging and health washed words, and and it's really confusing. Is that just because it says gluten free, organic, or it says real fruit, roll up, say on the front real fruit, and they've got all these artificial ingredients and added sugar added to them. Um, just because it says that doesn't mean it's instantly healthy, and that's why it's important to read the ingredients. So there are gluten-free breads, and I discovered gluten-free breads out there that were made from simple ingredients and that didn't have additives and thickeners and
Yeah.
all funny stuff in them. It was just about finding and sourcing them. So I think that's why you can fall into a trap, and that was a huge reason as well why I started Goodness Me, which was, doing a whole subscription box where every month you'd discover products in there, which has now led to a online health food store. And the idea is that our nutritionists review everything to give you that peace of mind, because I'm still very aware it is confusing out there. Like it's hard to read labels and we're all time poor. So yeah, I think it's very much needed. And as I said before, the food industry has totally set us up to fail. Like it's not there necessarily to always be on our side.
Yeah.
And a lot of these food companies spend like millions, if not billions of dollars finding that perfect bliss point, which is that combination of sugar, salt, and fat to make us keep wanting more and to not feel satiated. And I think that's a key thing when you asked me what is healthy earlier, what do you consider health and healthy food? And I mentioned, well, how nutrient dense is it? If it's nutrient dense, it'll give us the nutrients we need, the antioxidants we need, and it'll help us feel full and satisfied, which
Yeah.
is what we want.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you started embarking on this journey and you started to make changes in your diet and I'm assuming your lifestyle as well. Can you share the moment where you discovered food was medicine? Like
Mm,
when did you actually feel, wow, like I'm starting to feel good and it's coming from the food that I'm eating?
yeah. I would say it actually was a 9-month journey before my test results went back into normal range. So it's a long time to
Yeah.
wait. But after 3 months, one of the antibodies went back into normal range, and I was like, okay, something's working. And the doctor was like quite surprised as well. And I started feeling a bit better. Like I started regaining a bit more energy. So it was just those little wins that I started to notice. And that's when I really thought I was onto something. And so much so by the end of that year, um, so I had no energy previously to like do high intensity exercise, to, I could go for a little walk and stuff, but
Wow.
nothing more. Um, I had enough energy where we were like, let's go and do a trek in South America. And I thought, if I can do this, that's just such a huge milestone for my body. And so that was it's almost like a reward, like this is working,
Yeah.
and this has actually made a difference.
That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
When those little moments happen and you're like, everything that I've done leading up into this point is making sense. Like I'm on the right path.
Yeah.
Those little confirmations where you're like, yep, I'm on the right path.
That's it. And I mean, I speak to so many people now where they're at the start of their journey and they've tried so many things. And like, oh, this didn't work, that didn't work. I tried eating this way. But I think it's so important to remember your body's been sick for so long. It does take time to get better. It's not instant, and it is a process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So how did it feel emotionally to finally find that relief through just managing your diet and just not overcoming, because I'm not sure if you've fully overcome your autoimmune, but just regulating it and feeling normal again?
Yeah. Look, it's something I still always have to manage. I
Absolutely.
don't think it's ever 100% gonna be gone. I mean, I was relieved. I just felt normal again. Like I couldn't remember what it was like to get out of bed and have full energy. But I more got so excited by all these products I was discovering that, I started writing this business plan. And I thought, if I come back from this trip and I'm still excited about this, I was going to quit my job and launch this business, because I wanted other people to, experience what I had. And I couldn't get over the fact that, I'd almost been told, I was told to go to hospital every month for the rest of my life, when something as simple as food just made such a huge difference. Like my life could have gone down such a different route.
Absolutely.
So I think that was the key thing as well. And I had so much respect for these brands who are like, okay, we're going to maybe potentially sacrifice our bottom line a bit to create a real, product made with real food, which can be slightly more expensive, and give this a go. Like, I think that's really good when brands stand up and do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your day on a plate look like now?
Oh, God. I mean, this is a difficult question because I'm pregnant, so
Yes,
I'm eating
it would be very different.
really random and strange
on a
stuff.
normal day where you're not eating strange pregnancy cravings.
This morning I was like cutting up capsicum at breakfast. Like weird. I don't know. I'd had falafel last night. I was full, and I think listening to your body's just as
Absolutely.
important. Like
Yeah.
I just, but normally, like I always like to think about what a healthy plate looks like, which I feel like is the simplest thing a nutritionist once explained to me. So you've got half your veg, quarter protein, quarter, whole carbs and healthy fat in the middle. And I think just from a understanding perspective of knowing what a balanced plate looks like, that's really helpful. But, I eat everything. I'll eat, meats, eggs. I love fish. Omegas are really good as well. I still try to eat gluten-free as well. So just having lots of color in your diet and on your plate. But by no means am I perfect all the time. And I think it's really important that we don't look at food as like treats and, good and bad food either. And so I like to think about it as, there's sometimes foods out there and, you don't want to be berating yourself every time you eat sometimes food. They're there to have sometimes, but it's what you do most of the time.
Absolutely.
That counts, So, and my plate really varies. I think that question's tricky to answer. And we get so many new products.
So you get to try them all.
Try every day. Before, when I was unwell, I was actually quite regimented with what I'd eat, and I would eat like similar or same thing every day, which I think isn't good for, your gut health and just everything, and how boring.
There's a tip that someone shared on our podcast about eating 30 different plants every week for your gut health, which is so important. And if you're eating the same thing every single day with lack of variety, so if you're not eating any like veggies, plants, herbs, whatever, it'll be really hard to actually achieve that.
Mm,
But that variety is so important,
yeah, I
particularly
think
with
so.
just your food choices, like making sure you're loading up on all of the good things, like your
Yeah,
fruits, your veggies, your grains, herbs and spices as
that's it.
well.
Like all the basics, and then there's so much additional stuff we have there to give that added boost as well. Like I love putting hemp seeds on my
Yeah.
salad or my avocado toast, whatever. But they're all the bonuses
Yeah.
you can do, or whatever you add to your smoothie. But I think being super regimented about it, and I also think we actually in the early days we used to do a lot of day on the plates profiles of other people. But I think sometimes it can be dangerous if you are reading that and think, oh, I better follow that
Oh,
exactly. And then that's
absolutely.
what I'm going to eat all the time as
Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
you
And
know?
it's so important that everyone tailors it to their unique self, because what works for someone isn't necessarily going to work for you. And
Yeah.
so it's like, one, what is your goal? First and foremost, like, what are you trying to achieve? Two, is the way that you eat healthy? Like, are you getting variety in your diet?
Mm.
Are you getting enough of the good stuff? Are you eating for just aesthetics, or are you eating for good health?
Yeah.
So it's like really asking yourself all those questions, because me eating what you eat versus you eating what I eat is so different.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be alike, because we're so unique in our own
That's
ways,
it.
which is
Yeah. You've
important
got
as
to
well.
cater to your own body for sure.
And so, what are your 3 favorite products? So, like, what are like 3 products that you just can't live without?
Oh gosh, this is always so. I love. There's a brand, Undivided Food Co, that does these mayonnaises and aioli, and they're always in our pantry. And I love. They're just made with like olive oil and egg.
The Good For You mayo?
Yes,
Yes, I use
they're
them.
so good.
They're so
And I
good.
think it's a lot of the sauces in the supermarket that you think are fine, and they've got all these hidden ingredients in it. Um, we also have this tiger milk, which sounds really funny. It's like made from tiger nuts, which is they're actually nut free and from a plant. So if you're looking for a good plant based milk, which I think actually tastes better than your almond milk and your nut milks and all of that, it's amazing. And again, it doesn't have any industrial seed oils in it. It's all it's got olive oil, which is really rare to find in like a shelf stable
Yeah.
milk. Um, and what else? The other brand is Good Fish that we sell. So it's like a super sustainable. They do salmon, tuna, sardines. I love fish. And so they're really handy to have, always in the cupboard.
Yeah.
But yeah, just a brand you can trust as well.
And I'm assuming you can buy all these amazing brands from Goodness Me.
Yeah, yeah. So we try and curate like the best that we can find that, and, to have all the options you'd find at the supermarket, but just like the better for you.
Yeah.
Best options.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, with all of the information that's available online, how do you really cut through the noise? Like, what are your recommendations for our audience to know, okay, I'm watching this reel, I'm reading this post on Instagram. How do you like differentiate from like what's good advice versus not so great advice?
I mean, it's a tricky one, right? I think what I said before about keeping it simple, like food shouldn't be hard. And if you eat real food,
Yeah.
you should feel good. But there's so many complicated messages out there. And I almost think it's better not to get caught up in all that stuff. If something's going to make you feel restricted, or I should rather just speak on my own behalf, that's something I'd avoid.
Yeah.
If I feel like it's going to over occupy thoughts about food or just make it complicated, I don't think it's necessary. Yeah, if it's real food, then there's no reason, not to be eating it. Yeah, there's a lot of, I suppose, the diets out there was what I'd avoid.
Oh,
Yeah, it's got to be a
absolutely.
lifestyle.
Oh,
It's like, can you
absolutely.
do it long term for life? And that's it.
And that's the first question you should ask yourself is this sustainable?
Yeah.
Because the method in how you achieve something is so important, because if it's not something you can sustain, then you're essentially just going to rebound back to where you first started, whether
Mm.
it's to do with like your health, whether it's to do with your weight, whether it's to do with anything. If you can't sustain that same method that got you there, then you'll end up right back where you started.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
sustainability piece is so, so, so
I
important.
think so. That's critical. And if you keep going back, that's when people throw in the towel and go, oh, well, I couldn't keep that up. I'm just going to eat whatever and not worry, and you get back into this terrible cycle as well.
Absolutely. Can you share just some practical tips for someone who's looking to start transitioning into more of a whole foods diet?
Yeah. Um, as I said before, the way I started is step by step. So not to worry about redoing your whole pantry or kitchen straight away. Obviously, you want to have really beautiful fresh produce and, all the grains and the proteins there. But my recommendation is always, first and foremost, like cut the soft drinks. I think the added sugar and the artificial sweeteners in there, um, just aren't good for our bodies. And they're the easiest thing to swap or to cut. I think switching out your oils would be the second thing. So, if you're cooking with seed oils or vegetable oils, make those swaps to coconut oil, avocado oil, olive oil. There's so many options. Um, and then the third one might be like, I think getting just like a wholesome breakfast started so you start the day right. And I think if you kick off things and start that way, that's just a good way to keep momentum going for the day and then working your way through each meal or other categories within your pantry. But
Absolutely.
those would be the first three things.
So, my trainer actually said to me, I experience like hives, and we saying that it's coming to something to do with my gut, which we believe is like a parasite. And I have two parasites now on this treatment plan, and it's a whole journey. And when I was on a low histamine diet, I had to cut out coffee, and I was telling my trainer that I cut out coffee, and I'm like, oh, I don't know if I'm gonna have energy to exercise in the morning or whatever. And he's like, instead of stopping, why don't you switch? So like
Mm.
and I think it's such a great advice. A piece of advice is like, instead of stopping something that's habitual, which is like I was waking up and having coffee every morning. How can I switch it for something that's low histamine? So I'm still getting my daily ritual in, but
Yeah.
I'm consuming something that I know I can have on this low histamine diet. So when you suggest cutting out soft drink, what's something that, someone that wants to embark on this whole foods diet, what's a replacement or a substitute that they could have instead of soft drink that you would recommend?
Yeah. So there's so many. A huge thing was kombucha that a lot of
Yeah.
people were switching to, but you can overdo
Yeah.
kombucha for your liver as well because it's fermented. But there's so many soft drinks out there now that have natural sweeteners in them. Um, and there's a lot of sparkling waters out there now that have flavoring in them, all natural as well. So like we have a drink called Dash that's sweetened with, they use wonky fruit, for example, to slightly sweeten it. Um, there's also like hydration's a huge category growing at the moment. So natural hydration sachets in your water to make it flavored if you don't want to have plain water and you want to drink something flavored. So there's a lot of brands out there now giving really great alternatives. It's just about knowing the ones to pick. But there's so many out there with natural sweeteners, and they taste pretty
They
similar.
taste good. Yeah, I agree. So how do you balance eating a whole foods diet and unprocessed food with just a busy, convenient lifestyle? Because when you're working a lot, or you're a mum, or you just live a very busy life, which all of us claim to be doing, and we make the excuse of, well, I'm just so busy, so I'm just going to grab and go. I'm just going to eat this because it's easy for me. So how do you really balance that?
Yeah. So I don't do any meal prep. I've never done meal prep like that beginning of the week sort of thing. Um, for me, it's been about stocking the pantry and the fridge with all the right stuff so that when you run to it with the options, it's there. And so you're giving yourself the opportunity to make the better choice at the time, because I guarantee, like, when it comes to willpower as well with food, like if it's there,
Oh, yeah.
as I said, the food industry has set us up completely to fail. Like any of us are going to, you're going to grab that thing or just have the whole packet of something because the food's been designed that way to make you want more, more, more. So I think it's just about having the right options available there. And sometimes having like your go-to meals that are really quick. So for example, with my daughter, sometimes I know I just can't get her out the door in time and we're running late for me to take her to daycare. So I'll make like these banana mug muffins that I know I can grab and go, but they're made with really good ingredients and they take me 2 minutes to make, and I can pop it in her bag to go with her. So I think it's just about having those options
Yeah.
available to
Yeah.
you. And also knowing like you're not going to be perfect all the time either, and that's okay. Like this morning when I took her to daycare, I didn't have time even to do that, and I stopped off at a cafe, but the options there were like croissant, muffin, you know what I mean? But I chose like a spelt scone because I just know, okay, at least that's like, a whole grain that they're using to make that product, and it keeps her full and it's not as processed. So I'm not perfect all the time either. And sometimes you've just got to choose the best option,
Yeah.
you know?
Absolutely. How do you think your eating behaviors and habits have translated to your daughter?
So I've been really mindful of this. So she's 3.5 at the moment, and it's definitely, I think, critical, especially like that age 3 to 5, really important as well, because they're taking in so much.
They're a sponge. They absorb
Yeah,
everything.
everything, and they're watching you with everything. Our big thing on it is, as the parents, we get to choose, and I feel like it's our responsibility to choose what gets put in front of her on the table and when she eats. But apart from that, once that's down there, there's zero comments on the food and on the plate. And if she's hungry, she'll eat, and she knows these are all the options in front of you. You can put a few things down. So I think that's where it becomes really important as a parent to know how to make informed choices for your child. But I'm really conscious of how big eating disorders are these days. And I think so. I mean, I know in my day what it was like at school with friends and stuff. I can't even imagine with social media now what it's like as well.
Yeah.
So I think just putting none of that pressure around food and never, ever commenting on the plate, whether it's you're eating too little, you're eating too much, just nothing. It's up to her and she'll eat when she's hungry. But just giving her the options, what to choose from.
Such a great approach.
And again, the same what I do with myself, or, what adults would do. Like there's sometimes foods like you go to a party, I'm not going to make a big deal about,
I was going
having
to
the
ask that.
lollies
Yeah.
and that's a real thing a lot of parents really, really struggle with as well. Like your kids will come home and, can I have lollies? Can I have ice cream? Can I have, well, this is what we've got in the cupboard, or this is what's going down for dinner. And sometimes for an experience, or, it's a sometimes food, but we're also very mindful never to call it a treat, which I think is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. So at daycare, do they provide the food, or does she get her lunch packed and then she eats whatever you pack?
So where she goes, I have to pack everything.
Okay, I was just going to ask what happens if you don't agree with what daycare is giving
and
them.
so I've had that question. I've had a few mums ask me that on Instagram actually, because most
Interesting.
daycares actually provide the
Yeah.
food. And I had that actually at her previous daycare, and for the most part it was pretty good. I just had a chat with them with one or, a couple of things and said, can we swap this, or can I provide her with this instead? But it's also not to the point where you want them to feel different to the other kids, and they're not eating birthday cake when everyone else there's a birthday like every week or every other day and cake going around.
Yeah.
There's only so much you can control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just finding that balance, right? Which is so important.
Yeah, that's it.
So I've got 2 more questions. One that I'm really interested in before we wrap it up is just if you faced any setbacks or challenges when you were embarking on this journey to regulating your autoimmune disease.
I mean, throughout, so it's been 10 years. Throughout the years, every other month I'd wake up, particularly on the weekend. I don't know if my body would just crash and burn after the week, of work, but I'd get flare-ups. Um, and I actually get them a lot less frequently now, but for years they still happened. And I just had to stop and say, I've still got to rest because I know what this is, or maybe I've eaten something that's flared my body up, or maybe I didn't have alcohol for years as well because that was a huge trigger. But when I tried to introduce a drink here and there, my body could flare up, and I was like, okay, this isn't for me right now, or it's not ready. Um, yeah, I think that could feel like, oh, am I going back to
Yeah.
where I'd started, but just to keep going. And as I said, it's something I've got to still constantly manage and be aware of. Um, in saying that, last time I went to my immunologist, though, she said to me, she's like, your results, you're in normal range, but on like the lower end, which isn't great, but physically you present fine. And so her advice was this is a different immunologist, by the way, was to go by how your body feels. So that was a real milestone for me. I was like, okay,
How do you
this
feel?
is great. I feel good. I feel, yeah, I feel normal. This is weird to say. Like, I just, yeah, I feel like I've got the energy that I should have. I mean, apart from
I
pregnancy
was just to
symptoms
say,
at
apart
the
from being
moment,
pregnant right
like I'm in
now.
third trimester, so I'm definitely a bit more tired. But yeah, nothing out of the ordinary. The other thing is, like, when you're a parent and your kid's waking up every night and you're running on little sleep,
Yeah.
it can be really hard to go, is this normal because am I just tired because I'm not getting sleep, or is there something more going on here?
Yeah.
And I think that's when it's important to get your tests done. Like, I quite frequently will get my bloods done and my tests as well to say, well, do I have any deficiencies? Is everything working okay?
Yeah.
Even your hormones, like
Just
everything.
getting a check.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it.
And
Yeah.
just making sure everything's just doing well.
Yeah, and finding the right doctor for you that
So
actually
important.
cares. It's so easy to just, with the system, you're in and out. They don't look that much deeper. So
So
that's tricky too.
important. So, Peter, just to wrap it up, I do have one last question. So, if you could give your younger self advice just on nutrition that would have the biggest impact, what would you say?
I think it was going back to when I was 19, what I mentioned before, just before I got really sick, and I got caught up in I'm going to choose these healthy foods because I thought that was the right thing that I was doing, and feeling the worst I'd ever felt, looking the worst I've ever looked, feeling the sickest I ever, and thinking about food more than I ever had, and just not to do that. And my advice would be to eat food that actually made me feel good. Yeah.
Perfect advice. I love that. Thank you so much for joining me on the show. I love chatting to you.
Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I loved being a part of it, and I'll see you at the next one.